Hello, everyone. I guess as ever, let me know about the sound, picture, matchup, and all that kind of stuff. I see that we have some questions in chat about what sort of things to bring to ReaperCon and what sort of things you can bring through the airport, which I've certainly traveled to a lot of conventions. I don't always travel with a lot of kit, but sometimes I do. So I will talk about that. I'm just going to quickly switch over to the other view and catch people up on what we've done the past few streams, which have been, for the past 2 months or so. I've been pretty focused on conventions in general, well, ReaperCon specifically, but also the general idea of what you can do to improve your painting. So even if you're entering the quarterly contest or you just want to practice and get better for your own initiative, that's a lot of what we've been talking about, but then also some travel case options and a couple other things. So the article with the before and after pictures on the Bugbear is now up on my blog, which Wendy put the link in the chat. And then tonight or tomorrow, I'm putting up there's enough articles now that I'm going to make kind of a table of contents to separate out the stuff that's kind of about feedback and things like that. Oh, I seem to be a little... Yeah, I'm trying to... It's hard to position the camera so that you don't get a lot of lights, but we'll just live with that. And then there's a previous one with the blacksmith that's the same thing. It has before and after pictures, and then just general, as a judge and as a person who has been critiqued, here are kind of the most common issues that come up. Well, maybe I'll leave those there for just a minute. Last week, I started working on this Knoll after I finished going through the Mega Bundle for ReaperCon, which you can order even if you're not going to ReaperCon. And this hobby holder is one of the items in it, and I will probably continue to work on the Knoll. But let's talk about some convention type stuff that's good to know. So for the airport, the main thing you have to think about, I mean, if you have checked luggage, put a lot of stuff that would be problematic in the checked luggage so that you can avoid problems. So if you have like X-Acto knives and other sculpting tools that might be perceived as weapons or other issues, put that in your checked luggage, don't put that in your carry-on. For paint, you can bring it, but you still have to conform to the, what is it? So you get a quart bag, and so 1 quart bag, and the individual containers can't be more than 3 ounces, which our bottles are certainly well under that, but you can only bring, as many of these as you can fit in a quart bag, plus your deodorant and your toothpaste and whatever else you would have to put in there for your general trip needs. So I almost always pack the paint in my check luggage as well. I do double bag it, so I'll get a Ziploc, at like a big gallon-sized Ziploc, and then I'll put another Ziploc around that just so that if anything comes loose in transit or if they open it up to inspect it, hopefully it won't get all over my clothes. And I do try to remember to, check the caps as I'm packing that bag of paint. If you want to paint at the show, I do recommend that you bring some paint. You don't have to bring like hundreds and hundreds of bottles, but your favorite colors or a basic mixing set. The show has reached the size where there's no longer paint out publicly for everyone to use. Now, that said, most people are pretty friendly. And if you're sitting at a table and someone local or someone who drove has a big bunch of paint and you need a color that you didn't bring, they would probably be happy to share with you. And that is in general true of supplies. Don't bring super glue on the plane. The pressure will make it come out and not do good things. That you should either, just buy one of those little things locally or look for someone who's got a lot of supplies and ask them. Is there any other supply I don't bring on the plane? I would pack, like if you have green stuff or milliput or something like that, I would probably put that in my check luggage as well, just to avoid any issues. One thing you could do with the paint, because I haven't traveled a lot with paint, so I haven't run into problems, but you should be able to, I think it even says, it says water soluble on it. Let me switch the view for a minute. So if you're having an issue with the security person, point that out. Say this is not, there's no thinners or chemicals or whatever. This is just a water-based acrylic paint. That's the thing they're worried about, is having stuff like turpentine and volatile oil chemicals on the plane. But water-based paints are not a problem. Now, whether you can get an individual security person that decides it is a problem, that's a different question, because I think they have a fair amount of scope. I think I heard someone say that they contacted Reaper to get like the MDMS. I can't remember what the official name of that is. There's a sheet you can print out that kind of basically will say this is not a volatile chemical. MSDS, Quindy says. And that it doesn't give away, what all the pigments are and stuff like that, but it has enough information for you to know for health and safety purposes, and it should be enough for the airport. I mean, I really can't see them making a huge fuss about it, but there's always those stories about someone who 95% of people do whatever, and then there's that one person who has issues with something. If you are bringing any other materials, like your weathering powders or anything that if it got opened up, it could cause problems, I would definitely, probably double bag that. And that is one, I had a friend who had weathering powders in his luggage. This is my friend who's cursed at the airport, though, so there is that. Because this is the same guy. If you were here when I was looking through the miniature cases and I told a story about how they opened it with the door down so the shelf fell out and his miniatures got broken, this is the same guy. But he did have them search his check luggage, and they did not, they must have opened up one of the weathering powders and they didn't close it correctly, and it did get all over his clothes. I don't even think I've had my checked luggage searched in a long time. I mean, you probably have to have something that looks kind of weird on the x-rays, so probably stuff like putties. A lot of, they shouldn't even, if you have knives in there, they shouldn't even care because it's your checked luggage. What else? I don't like to put painted miniatures that I care about in my check luggage, regardless of how well I have packaged them. I would prefer to carry anything that I really care about with me in a case or wrapped up and stuck in my backpack. If it was like miniatures for a game that you wouldn't be totally crushed, because if you've got like a bunch and you can't bring them on the plane, I have had like class example miniatures and stuff like that. And I haven't had any problems. In fact, I've never even seen any evidence that they looked at them in my check luggage. On the Road to T-Mat says, do you think they would let one of those wooden paint cases with all the drawers and slots be carry-on so long as it was mostly empty? Yeah, they'll probably search it. They'll probably wipe it down for drugs or explosives or whatever it is they're looking for. But I think that they would allow it through. And in fact, if you're bringing miniatures and it's a safe way to pack them, wrap them up in bubble wrap or paper towels or something, stick them in your drawers. You might as well put something in there if you're carrying it anyway. If you had a hard case piece of luggage, it would probably be safe in there. But yeah, if you have soft luggage, I don't know that I'd risk putting a nice case in my check luggage. Green Users, who is Bob and Julie, says, we get ours checked regularly because of tools. And Trash says, they check mine since the last time I tried to bring 30 totes up from Peru. Yeah, that'll get your luggage. Don't be smuggling lizards under your shirt or anything, and that will help you not get inspected. So I would expect, allow it enough time to get to the airport so that if they do want to pull your wooden paint case aside and look through it a little more, that's not going to interfere with your flight. Because if it's something unusual, I think that does make them more likely to take a second look at it. But I've flown with a wooden miniatures case, and I can't remember if they had me ever open that one. They probably did a couple of times to swab it. They have had me open the one though it's got the clear front, they've had me open that a couple of times to swab in there. But they've been very careful of the miniatures. What else about the airport? If anyone else has airport experiences, feel free to share. I always have, like, my trips are usually long enough that I have to bring check luggage, so I just put anything that I think is going to be a problem in there, and I'm mostly worried about the miniatures and brushes. I do not trust the TSA security with my good brushes. So I have a backpack as my carry-on, and I always make sure that my backpack is big enough to put my brush case in there. And that even includes my class brushes, since I'm, hold on, I'm getting a phone call for some weird reason. Because I still wouldn't want to have to replace my class brushes, but even, I have the stupid brush case anyway. And I've used both the, there's a roll-up bamboo case, so you can get that down to about a diameter of that. And if you buy them, you'll usually see them. They're very long. They're set up for people to accommodate either our length of brushes or the brushes that people use for canvas painting. I just cut mine down, and then I kept those little bamboo skewer sticks because I figure I could make a bridge or something like that with them. So you're even getting a basing supply out of that. But the other case that I have is, I think it's called Art Bin. They make a bunch of container type things for artists, and they have like a flat brush case, and it's got strips of foam with little slots in them, so you slot it's kind of like that. You slot the brushes in, and it holds them in place. Trash asks, well palette or wet palette, which is better for con usage? That's going to depend a lot on what you do. So if you're purely worried about classes, there are supplies in the class. If you prefer your own wet palette or specific palette, most of us are probably going to have you use a wet palette in class just so that your paint lasts throughout the class. There may be techniques where they're using another palette, but we have like foam. It's not exactly like it's foam instead of, this is a plastic one. But you'll have a plate like this. There'll be paper towel, and there will be parchment paper, so we can make wet palettes in classes. If you're more worried about painting outside of class at the open tables, there I would think about what kinds of things do you usually do at a con. Are you likely to need to jump up and go out with your friends, or someone's going to call you over to do something? Maybe you just even want, bring like a flat plastic plate and just have parchment paper, so you put on that, and then you just throw the parchment paper out as you're heading off to your next activity. If you want to sit for a while and seriously paint, bring whatever supplies you enjoy having. Just remember, it is like a ballroom, so there's going to be a little trip to one of the restrooms when you need to dump out your water or change your water or whatever other thing. The classrooms are more individual meeting rooms or something like that, but the main area where you're likely to paint is going to be a ballroom or up in your hotel room, which then you will have much easier access to water. If you're taking classes and you have one, or you are willing to get one before before ReaperCon starts, I highly recommend one of those battery LED lamps. Just about every class I teach, there are at least a couple of people who are unhappy with what they feel they can't see in the class, even in places where I think it's pretty decent lighting. I also recommend, if you use a magnifier, definitely bring your magnifier, whether that's reading glasses or one of these things. Even if you don't use that all the time, because that's the other thing you can do to kind of address bad lighting, is magnify. So if you can, bring both to a class. And definitely, if you're going to sit around painting, you will probably want both as well. There's not any lighting provided. And I believe some of the tables will have access to areas to plug in, but not all of the tables. Let me see. I might have one in my drawer over here as an example. Well, that's an interesting puzzle, because I know I have one of those lights and I thought it was around here. I usually bring one to one of my classes, so if I need to, I can pass around the miniature and the lamp, and I almost always end up having someone who's just so upset about the situation that I loan them my lamp. But they're inexpensive. They're not that heavy anymore. I mean, it used to be like a thing to try to bring a lamp to a convention for classes, and now they're just little things you should be able to fit in your luggage, no problem. They're not going to consume that much weight. Definitely bring brushes you like and bring those to classes. I'm not even sure if we do have like just standard brushes in class. I try to bring some for people, because I know sometimes you might have forgotten you left it up in your hotel room or whatever as well. But particularly if you're fussy about brushes, and bring a variety, because you never know what. Like, bring some of your, I would say the most important ones to bring are like your nice brushes that you really like painting with, but throw in, a bigger flat that you would use for dry brushing or other things, and some other brushes, because sometimes people will have techniques that you aren't expecting. I would go back and reread the class descriptions and check if there's anything that the instructor said it would be handy if you have this, or we're going to be using that. If you registered, registration for classes was a little closer to the convention than usual this year, but it's really common to, you read all that stuff when you're choosing your classes, and then you just completely forget that the class description said, oh, please bring a 1/2-inch flat brush or something. So go reread the class descriptions. Not everyone is great about saying that stuff, but hopefully we're getting better. There will be paint in the classrooms. Hopefully. I'm not. Sometimes there's been miscommunications. It used to be that we would get like the first 56 colors in the white plastic case, and then last year they switched the bones colors. But people didn't realize that the bones color sets are divided up a little differently, so there were some colors missing for the first classes, but that is our problem, not yours. In theory, paints should be provided in the class, and I even bring extra sets. The Dogfather one is mentioning brush cleaner, which, yes, I would bring that. You can get this in a little small, it's like a 50-cent piece or a silver dollar size or something for travel. So this is kind of the general size, which isn't huge. This is it next to a miniature. It's not enormous, but you can get a little travel one, and that is all you would need for a trip like this. This stuff lasts for ages, but it is definitely handy, and you will probably find that you're rushing to clean up after a class or something. You may not take as good care of your brushes, so it's handy to have. I often, I bring it. I don't always use it at the con, but I always give my brushes like a nice deep clean when I get home from a convention. That's actually when I usually do my deepest clean. Like, I don't always clean them a lot, day to day. At least my rounds. I find with the big brushes or the flat brushes for dry brushing, those I end up cleaning right after I've used them. But hold on just a second. I have a sad cat situation, and since we're just talking, she could come and sit with us, but we'll see if she realizes that. If there is any other thing that you're really particular about, it shouldn't be too difficult to get a cup of water. Like, I don't use a lot of paper towel for wiping my brush. Okay, this looks like I wipe my brush, but this is more for, I try to get off kind of the gunky paint before I rinse it. But I use this dampened sponge a lot, and that's not a thing that's going to be provided at the convention, so I usually bring that because it's just, I've gotten used to painting that way. I would, if you have brush holders, so I don't have any of my little spools. Medicine bottles are a nice light item that you can bring, or even just some bottle caps and a little bit of putty, and then maybe that double-sided tape that I've shown you guys in case it's a flat bottom miniature, which we're supposed to be using bones if we can, so it probably will be a flat bottom miniature. So this is the 3M mounting tape, and my understanding, I haven't gotten a chance to try it yet, but my understanding is that Gorilla Glue makes an even better one, so I want to try that. Because most classes and the con in general, there aren't any holders around, and you will find it a lot easier to work in class and do whatever you're supposed to be doing if you have the miniature on a holder and you're not having to try to figure out, okay, well, how do I hold it so I don't touch the wet paint, or so I can, turn it over and do the technique that the instructor said. I think we do have a kitty. Hi, Katie. Come here. Come say hi. This is Ella. And this is how she likes to sit, so I guess you get to look at her behind. Here we go this way a little. You can get some of the more attractive parts of Ella. Ella in profile. And then she's going to kiss me, so now you don't even get Ella in profile. Hi, baby. She's very sad because everyone in the house is on a phone call, and that is troubling for her, I guess. She's kind of strange sometimes. Well, our other cat likes to go on a leash, so my husband takes him out a lot. And she gets very distressed when they're both out of the house. Like, she comes and tells me about it, like it's a big problem. It's like, they're going to come back. You don't even like the other cat. Why do you care? She is pretty adorable. That's her big skill in life, is being adorable. She's not a genius. She's adorable. She figured out a survival strategy. That was it. So we had some people join. We had Kieran Nico join us, and David Weir, Estrogene. So hello, everyone who came a little later. Let's see. Let me get I think I copied my list over here. So just for general packing thing, one thing that my husband, one reason I have a packing list is we did this like twice. We would go to cons and we had like our cameras and iPhones and this and that and the computers, and like we didn't bring any of the charging things. So our first afternoon at the con was like running over to Best Buy to be able to charge things. If you wear glasses and you have an extra pair, pack an extra pair. I would probably bring, if you're planning for your days to be pretty full and you don't have access to a car, I would maybe bring some snacks that you like, protein bars or granola bars, just so if you get kind of caught in between meals and you're about to start a class and you're hungry, then you can eat something and not have to worry about it. Let's see. So I did make a note to remember to bring any miniatures that I want to put in the contest, because I really like to have a nice thorough list. And then I have a bunch of class things that I have to bring as well, so I'll kind of ignore those things. If you do want to sit around and hang out and paint, I mean, you can buy whatever miniatures you want there at the Reaper booth. But if you like to prep in a particular way, like you like to kind of prime with brown liner or whatever thing you might like to do, why not have a few ready and bring those to the convention so you don't have to run around trying to get to the point where you can start painting. If you have metal to trade in, I think this might be the last year they're doing that. So definitely bring that. So I put that note in. And even when I'm just traveling to Reaper in general, if I have stuff that I had to cut off the arm of something, or they sent me two just in case, and which Ron doesn't do enough, but because stuff does happen. I'll bring the extras back in so they can melt it down and remake them. But the public ability to do that is going to be, well, I'm sure they don't mind if you just give them metal, because I just give them the things. But if you want to exchange it for an equal weight of products or whatever. I have a little notebook that I keep my notes in when I go to painting classes, or if I'm talking to someone and they have a great tip or something. And this year, since the swag bundles were mailed out, if you got the swag bundle and you like using the Reaper notebook, that was in your swag bundle, so you have to pack it. You're not going to be picking that up in your swag bag at the show, because there isn't a swag bag at the show. Okay, VIP guys get a swag bag, but I don't think it has a notebook. Depending on how you pack your miniatures, bring extra of whatever you use to pack them. So if you pack them in bubble wrap, bring like an extra sheet or two of bubble wrap and tape. If you pack them in a case and you use like poster tack to stick them down, bring extra poster tack. If you use magnets, like in case a magnet pops out, bring a couple extra magnets. So I always want to make sure that I can get things back from the show as well as to the show. And I plan to have extra stuff because maybe you'll see a super cool thing in the dealer hall and it's a little more fragile. So, you know, it might be like a resin bust or something like that. I don't know what all dealers are coming. But just in case, so that you can pack up any new things that you've gotten. So I wrote down sculpting tools and tweezers. Whether or not I actually pack those or how many will depend on my plans for the convention. If I'm not taking a class that involves sculpting, I'll be a little more minimal. The tweezers I like because even at a con where there are no cats, you can still find hair in your paint jobs. She's getting some hair in my paint jobs right now. I wrote down epoxy sculpt, but I mean, if you want to do any basing stuff, you also want to bring any, like, I mean, you can't bring a full basing kit, but you could do like little plastic Ziploc bags. You can get bags at the craft store for jewelry and stuff, and you could fill those with some static grass or gravel or other things you like to make kind of a mini kit for doing bases. I mentioned travel lamp. I mentioned magnifier. If you are bringing a wet palette, make sure you have the stuff that you need that goes with it. So remember your sponge, bring some palette papers, stuff like that. And then brush cleaner, like the Dogfather one mentioned. So that is my personal list of kind of, well, I also, in my other section, which is where I put down extra glasses and snacks, I added role-playing dice and a figure. If you plan on being in any role-playing games, we have one with some of the artists sometimes, so that's why I have that on there, so I remember, because we bring the figures back and forth with us. And often I will just buy another set of dice at the Reaper store, because I like to have new dice now and then. So did that kind of address all the questions? Is there any kind of follow-up stuff or other suggestions or questions that people might have of stuff that you wish you'd had at a con once, or that you were wondering if you can bring, or if it's how do you travel with it, anything like that? I will be happy to share my opinion, because I guess I've been traveling to these conventions for a while now. I feel like there must be paper towel somewhere for people to use. But I probably wouldn't, I would probably be thorough and just to be sure I would rip off a few sheets or if I went to if you ever hear anyone bug me about Chipotle napkins. So when I'm at a restaurant, if there are napkins left over, I keep them because I think it is wasteful to just throw them out because we can use them another time. Because then sometimes you're at a restaurant, you don't have enough napkins, and then I have extras. But you can also just grab stuff like that while you're out for meals to paint with later. I believe that there will be food trucks. I'm not 100% sure. There usually are. It's an unusual year, so I cannot remember if they've mentioned food trucks. There is a restaurant on site. It's kind of a fancy restaurant. I like it, but it's not an every meal restaurant. There is like a mini Starbucks, so I don't know if it has like all the Starbucks stuff, but it's also the I can't remember what they call it. Like they have like chocolate bars and ice cream and stuff like that, snacks that you can pick up there, and basic, if you need aspirin and you didn't bring any, they have stuff like that. I think, of course, at hotel markup prices, but it's nice to have that stuff there. So Quindy says John just posted information about 2 of the food trucks. There were some really good ones in 2019, so I'm gonna have to check out that link after the show too, because I'm curious to see what we'll get. The IHOP is in walking distance, because that's what my husband and I did last year when the first day we came in. I feel like there's a couple other things that I'm blanking on right now that are kind of in walking distance. But if you're from a, Quindy says Cheddar's is in walking distance. If you're from a big city where you're used to getting around by buses and sidewalks and stuff, it's the suburbs. It's not like that. It is a driving place. So there's tons of stuff around, but it is all set up on the premise that you probably have a car. Which, again, people are friendly. And if someone else is going out to lunch, they might bring you along. Nowadays, we have cats who try to strangle you. We have Lyft and Uber and stuff. So there's certainly ways to do it, but don't expect to be walking around to many other places than IHOP and Cheddar's and the hotel convenience store and the hotel restaurant. And if you, back in the olden days when ReaperCon used to be at the factory, we had, they had made an arrangement with the nearest Sonic, and so Sonic would send over a few people and they would cook like burgers and tater tots and a couple other things. And actually over the years they did kind of increase it. They started adding vegetarian things. I was vegetarian then, so I very much appreciated that. So we actually have a lot more options now than when it was back at the factory, because you definitely do not want to be walking on Teasley Lane. I'm Nomad Zeke, so most of you just missed this cat. Looking all goofy and purry. She's not very photogenic. I don't know why. She's so pretty, but it's really hard to capture it in picture. And now it looks like she's making this smirk. She's not. She's a very sweet cat. But we've just been talking about things to bring to ReaperCon, dealing with stuff on the plane, stuff you would need to bring in a class. Oh, when I said a notebook, I obviously also should have mentioned a pen and pencil to take notes in your notebook. Because writing with your paintbrush would probably take too long. It would be inefficient. It'd be a good way to practice, but it would be inefficient. But yeah, so magnification, light, something to hold your miniature, your favorite brushes. Those are probably what I would say are like the top 4 things I would bring to classes, and then a notebook and pen. I try to give people really thorough handouts, particularly if it's a hands-on class, so that you don't have to take time away for writing. But I also know, on the other hand, I'm someone who, my style of learning is I do better if I take notes. Like if I take notes on something, I'm more likely to remember what was said than if I just listen and read something later. So think about how you like learning and see what you can try to come up with to accommodate that. Do not chew that, please. Don't give Justin a heart attack. We're gonna have document cameras like this year, so that we'll be able to do the demos in such a way that you should be able to see without having to crowd around us, which I think is great, because honestly, even when it's safe to crowd around people, I don't think I really see what the person is trying to show me half the time when we do that crowding around thing. I try to find ways to scale up the demonstration so that it is visible, but even with that, I'll usually have to do like 3 or 4 people at a time and repeat it. So this will be nice, where I'll just be demonstrating something once, and then maybe I'll, keep going while people are practicing, but it should give me more time to be giving people feedback and demonstrating kind of more of the process instead of just here's the basics. So Named Zeke says, I remember one time I was bringing a Calidrax back from a different trip, and it was in my carry-on. TSA even said, I'll try to be careful with your bones. Whether they thought it was real bones or not, he doesn't know. Yeah, I bet they see some things. I would love to hear some stories from weird things that the TSA people have seen, because I bet they see some stuff, especially in check luggage. So I was going to talk a bit about stuff I use too, because I know people are always interested in the supplies and how people set up their desks, and that we love sharing, pictures of our space and asking people what they use. So I thought that I would, as I work on the Knoll, that I would talk a little bit about that. So this, just for the people who came late, there's a post up on my blog now with the before and after pictures and the summary of what was, the critique, and then what was changed on the Bugbear, and it has links to the videos, so if you missed those. And then there's a similar thing with this guy, and coming today or tomorrow will be like a table of contents to all the kind of improve your minis contest type stuff, which also has some general convention info. So this is the wet palette I use. This is kind of like the original one that people have. It's the Masterson Stay Wet Handy Palette. And I even have a new one. So when I started doing kind of traditional media, I got another one in case I wanted to do, regular things. So here's what a new one looks like, one that hasn't been used for 15 years. And it comes with this yellow sponge. It used to come with a white sponge, and then for reasons unknown, they switched to this yellow sponge, which traditional artists are no more enthused about that than miniature painters are. Because this is going to, your perception of a color is affected by the colors around it. So this is going to affect your perception of a color. The ideal would probably be a neutral gray, like how I had that piece of paper out. Now I don't know what I did with my piece of paper. Something like that would probably be the best surface to be mixing our paint on, because it's like a middle value and a neutral color. But white is a lot better than yellow. And it's textured on one side, to help it stick in the thing better. And then it comes with this paper, which you can see is pretty thick. I know a few people who like using this paper. You have to soak it in hot water before you use it. And this is not, this is kind of equivalent to miniature paint. I don't know why it's soaked in, but I was able to rinse it off and use it a second time, and I'm going to try to use it a third time. There are instructions to using it. If you do want to try the actual paper, it'll come with like 2 or 3 pieces, I think. Most people I know prefer to use parchment paper. So that is not wax paper. Parchment paper is a different thing. I believe that in some countries it is called baking paper. It's what you put on the cookie sheet to make cookies on. So these are actually flat ones. It comes in the roll like wax paper or saran wrap, but it also, like, this is a sheet that's pre-cut to fit on a cookie sheet. And I just fold this in 4 and cut them up for my palette papers. I had trouble getting this for a while. Like, I would go in my Kroger and they wouldn't have any. Because the Reynolds brand is kind of the preferred. I haven't had any problems with this Kroger brand, which for all I know is made by Reynolds. I used to use Wilton. I used to pay extra for it, and then it seemed like it went strange, so I didn't like it anymore. So that's like the classic wet palette, and this was made for acrylic canvas painters. They didn't realize they were making something we could use. But I find this one is a great size. For miniature painting. There is a bigger version though. When I took the class with Banshee, he had us get like the big one, and for the kind of mixing he does, you need as much surface area as you can get, but it takes up a lot of desk space. So I have found myself reluctant to use it for everyday miniature painting. I mainly end up, when I'm doing oil painting, I store my palette in there. So that was not a necessary thing in my life, but I mean, I'll find a use for it at some point. But you may have noticed that I have a white sponge. And when they switched to the weird yellow sponge, under here somewhere. So what I did was I searched for compressed white sponge on, I think it was eBay, but I would search on Amazon nowadays, because I bought those years ago, because it's been quite a while since Stay Wet switched to the bizarre yellow sponges. So I would look for that, and then what I have on top. So what I have on top of it is paper towel, and I actually use the Viva brand, because you can see it doesn't have any of the little quilting. So it's a flat surface. I mean, this is fine too. Don't feel like you have to go out and buy special paper towel. I bought this partly to do traditional art projects with, and unfortunately they've changed the formula of Viva. It used to be very cloth-like, and it didn't have any lint or anything. And it's not quite as awesome. It's still good, but it's not quite as awesome as it used to be. So I put that on top. And that trick I got from Aaron Hartwell, Corporea. It makes things smoother, and it seems to help the hydration. Like, you'll be surprised how much extra water you have to add after you've put the layer of paper towel down on top of the sponge. And it also, so these can mold if you leave them a while, even though one important note that I should make that I found out the hard way, this is not an airtight system. I believe this is by design to try to stop molding. So if there's a little bit of air circulation, it will keep it longer. But that also means that if I lifted up this wet palette here, like this, there would be water and gunk going all over the place. Ask me how I know. So I also put, this will fit in a gallon Ziploc. So even though I wring out the sponge and everything before I get on the plane, I usually put this in a gallon Ziploc bag as well, just so if there's any extra moisture in there, it's not going to get on my clothes. There are ones made by miniature people now. I went in the last Redgrass Games, but I don't remember their company name, but they do a palette that people have been, they call it the Everlasting palette, that people have been raving about. And when the changes that they made to kind of the second edition got me curious enough that I was willing to try it. I think Privateer Press makes one. Games Workshop probably makes one. Some of them are quite small, like they'd be more like this size, and that's almost too small for me. But everybody's different. Jessica Risch paints, her wet palette is, if you've ever seen like those plastic card holders you can get for Magic cards or whatever, just those little like one deck clear things you open the top. That's her wet palette. She's painting on like this, and I have no idea how she does that. But she just has little tiny drops of paint and mixes most of it on the brush and then applies it to the mini. So everybody ends up having a different process. Kiruniko said, I had to buy extra baking paper as my housemate was getting tired of me sealing there so much. Yeah, let your housemate bake, because then they may share the baking with you. You do not have to have a fancy thing. Like you can get like one of those sandwich style stored plastic storage containers and use that. I like this partly because the lip is not narrower, shorter. The height of this is less, so that when I'm painting, my hand isn't bumping up against it. So if I had a sandwich container and it was like 2 inches tall, it would probably bug me. And if that is the case, it bugs you. Another thing you can do, or if you've never used a wet palette and you're like, why do I even care? Just grab a plate, put some paper towel on it, get the paper towel wet, stick a piece of parchment paper on it, and you get to experience whether you enjoy a wet palette or not. Some people do use them to preserve paint in between sessions, and that will often, you'll see it recommended on that basis. I rarely find that works for me. So if you were here, I don't think it was last week, I think it was the week before, I had done some touch-ups, like I'd done the eyes and stuff on the bugbear the night before the show, and then when I took this off, you could see that the paints had gone kind of watery because, it's kind of like a terrarium. The vapor will come up here and then it'll precipitate into water and it'll drip down on the palette. I think this is slightly permeable, so there may also be water coming up through there. You can try to fool around with, sometimes if I am working on a project and I'm coming back the next day, I'll try to be like, okay, I'll leave it like that. And maybe that'll be the perfect balance between there's some air getting in there to stop it raining on the palette, but there's not so much air that the paint's going to dry. The other thing I find that you have to do for keeping paints longer is you want to keep the pools as small as possible. So you watch me and I mix these big pools. Those don't really keep to the next day. And I'm fine with that. I will mix the paint again. Unless it's just for touch-ups, and then I'll try to add a little water and just do a little touch-up or something. So you've got to kind of think about what your goal is with the wet palette. If it's being as frugal as possible with your paint and making a stretch, you want to try to keep the droplets of paint small so that there's a smaller area that it's evaporating from. I don't remember all the science principles, but there's science principles there. And you want to try to not drag it out like I did here. I noticed a few little white spots on the black main part, so I was just touching those out before I started the stream. So that's the wet palette. Let's see. Cyberstorm says, I have that wet palette. I don't like my paints to touch, so I actually find it small for me. Do you mean this one, or like the big Banshee one even is too small for you? Because if you like this one, but you find it too small, there is a bigger version. It might be called something slightly different. I think it's like red and blue instead of the white, but it has the same sponge and the same papers and stuff. Star Wars Geek says, I use my wet palette just for the painting session, then I clean it out and throw the parchment away. I don't try to keep my paints for the next day or session, as I always find them too watery. But I do love that it keeps my paints workable for a long time. Yeah, that's pretty much how I use it. I will keep them on, like, if I painted and I'd only use half this piece of palette paper. I've been throwing them out more because I figure it should look nicer for you guys, or I should be, if I try to squeeze it into frame. But for me, I would keep going on the paper until I filled it, probably. Because I will occasionally go back to mixes and try to make them workable again if it's just a little touch-up. Or then I have the mix there so I can compare the paint mix, although I don't do that much often. It's more just me trying to be frugal and not throw out all my sheets. The thing I'm really bad at is, like I mentioned, these can mold. It won't happen immediately, but I'm like, last week I painted on this and then I was all like, oh sure, I'll paint this week. And I've been really bad about painting lately, and I didn't. And then when I opened it up and I threw the paper out, I noticed some yellow on the paper towel. Or if I touch it and it's a little slimy, that's mold starting up. So that is the nice feature of adding the paper towel, is that it seems to start on the paper towel first, so it keeps my sponge in better shape longer. But I am like really bad about, I'm like painting intensely and I think I'm going to keep going, and then I don't, and for some reason I don't come over to my painting area and be like, okay, well, I'm not painting, so I should at least, rinse this out and let the sponge dry out and stuff. I saw that Mini Masterworks, I can't remember what the company is, I think it's MW or MWM, said they have some kind of thing in a dropper bottle that you can add a drop and it's supposed to keep stuff from molding. And I am curious enough about to try that. Now under here, I have a few copper pennies, and so this is just a strip of straight copper sheet. And then for the pennies, they have to be older than, I think, 1985, or there's not enough copper in them to be worth doing. So this one's from 64. It helps. That's why they used to make doorknobs out of copper, because it's kind of a natural bactericide or something. But clearly it doesn't completely prevent it if you are someone who is prone to leaving your palette unattended. And I think that might be even more likely to become a problem if you have one that does completely seal. Like the Mastersons, at least I have a few days for me to try to remember that I've been a moron and I need to clear that out. Star Wars Geek says, if I'm not going to use mine for a while, I will wash it out with vinegar water mix, as I've heard that kills the mold. I'm not sure if it helps, but I haven't had too many mold issues with my red grass one. Hi, Otter Mama. And Cyberstorm also uses a penny in his, and it does help with the mold. When I had a really bad molding incident a few years ago, and I think I tried to wipe everything out with bleach even, as well as vinegar. And then this is from that one time my cat threw the palette on the floor. Not that cat, not the nice sweet cat. This was a cat with a completely different personality, who was also, well, he was awesome. He's not awesome anymore. He's awesome in our memories, but he was also kind of a troublemaker. Because mostly, weirdly enough, they don't mess with my paint stuff. He did, when he was a kitten, he did train me out of leaving miniatures out on my desk, because I was prepping some metal miniatures, and then it was like time for dinner or something, and I just left them out on my desk, and I came back and there were like little bite marks on a couple of them. So, I mean, which, I could incorporate into the paint job, I guess. So that is palettes. I brought a selection of brushes today. I'm going to start with that one of the most common questions I get, actually, which I, for some reason, did not expect when I started kind of teaching and stuff, is what order to paint things in. So I like to kind of discuss that when I'm painting on stream or whatnot, to give people examples. Or in my blog articles, I will sometimes discuss it too. So with this guy, one suggestion is paint from the inside out, or paint the way you would get dressed. So Cyberstorm says, it's interesting how we think we train pets, but really they train us a lot more. Yes, this is true. That was a good thing to train me for, because I actually am pretty good about, I might leave out bottles of paint, or like just have my brushes out or whatever, but I always put away the important stuff now, even though subsequent cats have never even looked at my desk. So for this figure, you would think that the skin would be a really good place to start because it's under the pants, it's under the strap, and it's even under the fur. In this case, I'm actually going to start with the fur because there's kind of like, well, I'm going to start by basing his tail is what I'm going to do. There's kind of like a sub-clause to the paint, you know, just paint from the inside out, or a different considerations to make. One is, can you reach stuff? So I've had like figures, they're wearing a cloak, and that inside of the cloak is going to be really hard to reach. If I've painted their skin to look all nice, and then I've worked on their pants or skirt or whatever, and then I want to come back and do the inside of the cloak, it's going to be really hard for me to do that without getting paint where I don't want paint. So I will look for places like that on a miniature, and even test with my brush. You know, you've got the miniature, you can dry test with your brush. Hey, can I get in there? Let's zoom in a little, since we're not looking at the palettes anymore. But then it's going to want to focus on the palette instead of the guy. So, okay, close your eyes a minute. And here, I will switch to the other view before I move the camera. I think I have it too far to the other direction on my desk. So let's see, make sure that the lines are as straight as I can make them, because I understand having OCD. So in this case, I'm going to start by doing the dry brushing because that's messy. So that's kind of like a secondary factor I would consider is there a reason that I would want to paint another section of this miniature first? And it might be maybe you want to do the metallics first before you start working with matte paints because you're worried about getting metal flake all over stuff. Dry brushing is a good one to think about doing first if you can, because then you don't have to worry. Like if I accidentally dry brush onto the skin, oh well, it doesn't matter. I haven't done anything with the skin. So that tail's probably going to need another coat. So while I'm waiting for that, what I will do is lining. And we talked about lining last week, I believe. A little bit. So I don't feel like I need to line between the fur and the skin because the fur is black. So surely that is dark enough. But I do feel like I need to line in between the skin and the pants because I'm thinking about making the pants like a faded blue kind of color. So I'll just use this black since I already have it on my palette. So I'll just thin it a little. I'm going to use brush on sealer just so it doesn't get super liquid. But basically I'm just trying to make it a little transparent. Oh, that was the other thing I was going to show you guys. Is I noticed I was watching one of the streams to see if I missed any questions. And I had whipped out a pokey tool that no one had seen, and then I put it back and I didn't notice someone had asked about it in chat. So this is one I bought at a ReaperCon. Queen Penguin had a booth where she had custom pokey tools, and this is, I'm kind of into dragons and collecting dragon stuff, so I wanted to have that in my collection. But I've got the ReaperCon one and the classic, and then I finally decided I'd just go ahead and unbox it, the Clever Crow. And I believe both of these were sculpted by Julie. And Bob did the cool print on the back of that one. I don't know if he did the print on the back of this one, which also tells you what year it's from, so that now they're collectible and we can get a different one next year. Hopefully. Maybe they figured out a better way to produce them. Because my understanding is they're a little labor intensive to make, because they have, these are like T-pins or something, so they have to put those in the mold and then put the metal in the mold. So it's there's like an additional step from how you would make a miniature. So yeah, since Queen Penguin paints, she knows we like pokey tools. Sorry, the one brush I didn't get out is my mixing brush, and I don't seem to be able to find it. There it is. So I like to keep an old crappy brush for mixing. And lining is a place where you're going to want a brush with a nice sharp point. So I definitely do use my fancy brushes. You probably will want to start with something a little smaller. I often will feel comfortable doing it with a larger one, or I might go to a smaller one. Sometimes a narrower one is more what I want. So I like a fat belly brush. If you watch Anne's show, she likes the Da Vinci, and those are a long, narrow brush. And I like this one doesn't even seem to be that fat in the belly for some reason. But I like the little bulge there, and then it goes down to the fine point, instead of being more like a column that just tapers a little. For some reason, I find that for doing blending type strokes, I enjoyed that style of brush more. But for doing lining type stuff, I actually enjoy the long, narrow type of brush. I had one that was like super narrow and pretty long, and I can't remember what brand it was now. It might have been Da Vinci, but I don't think it was a Da Vinci Maestro. I think it was a Da Vinci something else. But it got down to the point where, you know, like, okay, now it only has 3 hairs, and now it only has 2 hairs, and like now it can't really do its job at all, so I will just give it up and let it go to Brush Valhalla. So you can see what I like to call it, worry about one side of the line, if you can. So I got paint all over the strap. I don't care. I haven't painted the strap yet. So I care about getting the line nice on the belt side. This is why I'm doing lining now. I could wait until the end, and then I would have to be very careful, and I would be very stressed out. So it's possible that some of this will end up getting covered over by other things that, you know, when I start doing the shading and highlighting on the skin or whatever, and I'll just like spot fix a couple of little places, but I won't have to do all of this over again. Apparently I should have mixed a little more black paint. So I am actually not as neat and precise of a painter as it would appear on occasion. I just choose my battles. Alright, I need a little more black paint, looks like. Star Wars Geek says, I do my own molding and casting, so I bought some T-pins and made a Spirit of Yoda version. Oh. Wow, you've got your own custom Poke Tools. That is super cool. Now that you see, I mean, like a little baby Yoda one in his carriage, that would be pretty cool. So, oh, I am not staying in frame. Is it focusing on the guy pretty well? Let me know if I need to move the palette out of view, because that helps it focus sometimes, I think. So I'm not like always this messy, but I'm pretty messy. I mean, you can see where I got the paint on the wood, and it's a similar thing. I haven't painted the wood yet. Why do I care? Acrylic paint covers over itself. Now, why would I care? There is an occasional answer to that, and that is if I planned on painting whatever surface this is white or something, yellow, I would be making my life difficult, and I would want to cover it over with some gray or something to make it easier to paint that more transparent color over. All right, so let's see. The tail is not quite dry. I could go back to working on the non-metallic metal a little bit. And as usual, I shook my paints before I started the stream. And you should shake your paints more than you are seeing me do here. I mean, Reaper paints are pretty good. They don't need like an, oh, I guess I should be telling you guys the colors. So that was Dragon Black, I think is what I pulled out today. This gray is Mantis Gray, but I mean Stormy Gray or whatever it is. You can use all the classic misty, stormy, rainy grays for this step. I just wanted to try some paints that I haven't tried a lot, that the camera doesn't want to focus on at all. There we go. And then Gosra gray. This one is ancient bark. Oh, the kitty did leave some hair behind. She's not the bad one for that, though. The other kitty that we have, his fur is just everywhere all the time. And he's not like the worst for that I've ever seen, but it's most of my cats up to this orange guy they have like this very sleek, thick fur. And it doesn't, as long as I'm not putting them near the desk like I just did, it doesn't really get into the paint that much, or the general things, even not just paint. But he has this thin floating fur that it's just everywhere. Like, we're going to come to ReaperCon and we're going to be covered in orange fur because it doesn't matter if he's not there. His fur is always there. All right. I was loving that brush when I used this brush. So I had worked on this main face and then done a little work. Well, come over here, actually, and start the wet part and then go back. And I actually think that I want to change my mind on this. So light will kind of actually come in on a flat plane and go to the opposite side. And since he's tilting the sword down, and then also I get to do the thing I talked about the other week, where I can alternate the planes, light and dark, because being able to put something light in proximity to something dark, that's why this looks shinier than this does. I'll put the white in, even though I'm gonna well, I won't, because I'm gonna cover it over. So this didn't go to full white, it went to this color, which, I mean, it's pretty light. But I didn't do anything on the edge plane. So here I put dark paint on the edge plane and then light paint on the large face. And that's why this looks shinier. So if I move where the light plane is, Edgy Outsider asks, how often do you use blood for the blood god? Do you mean how often do I literally cut myself on my projects, or is this a product? I rarely cut myself. I often, well, not often, but too often, poke myself dramatically enough to draw blood. So I certainly have had projects where, so that's a hobby. Scar, there's a couple others. But I'll just have tools and stab myself. I'm pretty paranoid about knives, so I guess maybe I take more care with knives. I have not tried that paint. There is, Tamiya makes these paints called clears, and they do a really nice blood effect. I find the smell pretty intense, so I don't use them a lot. But that is, if I really wanted to do a nice grody blood effect, that is probably what I would grab. You can kind of let them thicken up and have a congealed type of thing going on as well. So it's a texture as well as a color. But if I'm just doing a few drops of color, I'll just mix it. There actually is I'm not sure if it is blood red, but there's not the early release, like the early numbers of the red paints, but there's like one that's in the 100s or the 200s. There's a triad, and I believe the lore is that someone had cut themselves and studied it to incorporate into the paint color. See, that is unfortunate. So I got a drop of water on here, which is a very common thing that happens to me, and it went in the paint, which is definitely not where I want it, because it is now thinning this paint more than I said it should be thinned. So I like to control my paint consistencies, which mostly is like I didn't thin this at all. But I'm going to add to that pool a little just to make sure that it's not too thin. It's Warhammer Paint. I think I use it for my drawing sometimes. Oh, you do drawings with miniature paint. I mean, really, this is fluid acrylics. So there are some like art store brands that I've been curious to try for miniature painting. Because the tube paint is, depending on the kind of art you do, tube paint can be too thick. No, I don't get a lot of GW paints because I really hate their paint pots. When I do get them, the paint dries out. And at this point, since it's like years and years after people started pointing this out, it seems like maybe that's not an accident. And I would rather have, I have bottles of paint I bought 15 years ago, and as long as I run a little maintenance on them sometimes, they're fine. I just need to remember to check them every couple of years and add some water, and they're in great shape. And I would rather have paint that does that. So I don't hate paint pots compared to dropper bottles. I mean, I prefer dropper bottles. I don't love the privateer press style paints. I have some hand and finger problems, and they actually can cause me pain opening them. But from a functional point of view, like, I don't have a problem with bottles or tubs of paint. It's just if the point of the bottle is to keep the paint from drying out, mission not accomplished. So the last time GW changed their paint formula, I haven't tried any of the paints from that, when they changed everything so they could copyright the names. I've tried some of their paints and inks before that, and I liked the paint just fine. I just hated the bottles. I have a little bit of ink left. I even have one here for some reason too. Actually, the reason is I was doing paint maintenance, so this is an ink. Like, this store doesn't even exist anymore, never mind this color. And I just couldn't get this open, so I kept leaving this out to try to get my husband to open the bottle for me, and then I forget to ask him to do it. It dries super fast, so with my ADH brain, it's perfect. I suspect any miniature paint would do the same thing because it's acrylic paint. There are occasionally companies that will add retarder into their mix, but I don't think any of the miniature paints currently available add that. It's something you can buy separately to add if you want. Like, I was kind of doing wet blending just now. Sometimes people like to add that retarder stuff to make this kind of thing easier. What I'm doing instead of doing that is I'm accepting that what I'm going to get with the wet blending is rough, and then I'm going to do this with dry paint, wet paint over dry paint to make it more how I want it. Weirdly, even though I have been exploring traditional art, I don't use acrylic paints very much. I do want to experiment with them, and I don't know if it's kind of like, well, that's what I use in my day job, or why I'm resisting it. But for some reason, I have resisted using this stuff in everyday life. I did a little online mini workshop thing where we used acrylics, and I didn't have one of the colors that they wanted, so I ended up using a miniature paint for that instead. And it's interesting because you can see, because we like our paints really matte, and then the tube paints, they don't care about that. It'll be whatever way the pigment likes to be is how the paint will be mixed. So that's like, some pigments are naturally very shiny and some are less shiny, and some are even matte. And most of the pigments we were working with were shiny, so you can see where I used which ones less by the color than if you move the paper around. You can see that some areas are shiny and some areas are not. I could probably even almost grab this picture if I just give me a sec. I think I can get it from this side. So this is the picture, and you can see where like some super shiny paint was. And then anywhere I used the pink color, which was the one I ended up using that was miniature paint, it's way less shiny. But then these paints, which were like standard tube paints, whatever they're made with is not as shiny. And people just put a varnish on later to unify that if they want it to be all one way. But it was funny because I don't mind the shininess in oil paint, but I was like, you know what? I think I probably would put a matte varnish on this just because I'm used to seeing things in matte because of how we paint with miniatures. So I think I want it matte. I feel like I can't always see what's happening if it's shiny. All right, so that black must surely be dry by now. So I'm going to use similar colors, or probably the same colors as I would use on my skin. So I was going to go with we had the Rogue Shadow. But from Rogue Shadow to, from black to Rogue Shadow, I don't know if it's even going to be noticeable, but we'll see. So the foundation layer of the fur is black, and then we'll do that. I'll probably mix an intermediary step. Then if I need to go even lighter, I'll use this Brine Wood Brown. So as I have been for the past few months, I am mainly using paints from the Bones 5 Kickstarter that just fulfilled, then the swag box for ReaperCon this year, but I also have the paints from the swag box from ReaperCon last year since they're all pirate themed as well. So these are makeup brushes. I bought like this enormous set on like Amazon that I think I got like 15 brushes for $12. Now some of them, these are not even the big ones. These aren't even remotely close to the big ones. So some of them are a ridiculous size, but for the price, I'm not going to complain. And then most of them are kind of sort of like flats or cat's tongue, I think filbert we would call it. But this one's round, but the bristles have been cut so it comes to a point. But I also have like a little, Elf is the brand that if you want to shop in person in America, like in your drugstore or big box store, you will probably find this brand of inexpensive makeup brushes. So I have this one that I have not even tried yet. Let's see. Edgy Outsider. I think he's actually a Knoll. No, so he's based on a hyena. And if anyone, will not torture you all with more hyena fun facts or the same fun facts again. But if anyone wants to listen to some interesting information about just how unique hyenas really are, we did that last week. We talked about the unique biology and physiology of hyenas. So just, I'm going to do the dry brush loading and unloading off screen because I don't think I can get it with the paint and everything stay in focus. We'll try maybe. So these brushes will grab like a lot of paint, but they don't take a lot of effort to unload. And then, if you're used to like scrubbing a lot for dry brushing, these you want to start with a much more gentle hand because it's a soft bristle. And I really don't expect that this Rogue Shadow is even hardly noticeable. So I think I am just going to mix and go up. Now these brushes I will be washing after the stream. I find that, Quindy remembers the fun facts. She was trying to decide whether she needed to moderate me last week, I think. I was told I could say things, I just couldn't show things. So that's what Justin told me. Also, those were all true facts, and I wasn't talking about people or anything. But I wanted to share the information about, is it in focus at all, or it's just focusing on the paint? I think it's just focusing on the paint. So I'm going to give up trying to let you guys see the paint so that you can instead see the miniature in focus. So the Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing game depiction of them as, these very evil creatures is in line with kind of real-world myths and stuff, but it is not accurate to what they're really like. They actually, have a complex social structure, and they're not all scavengers stealing from lions and stuff like that. But I believe in the D&D lore, they have had some kind of demonic influence. The gnolls, I mean, not actual hyenas. Since I'm sure there are also actual hyenas in D&D. And presumably this also affects their colors, because this coloring is not very natural to a hyena. I had got these... I'm messing all the lights up. So I had these reference photos, and you can see they're much lighter in coloration. But I wanted to have these, if I try to do the spots, so that I can kind of reference where the spots go. But in the D&D depiction, they're usually like dark gray, almost black. So that is why we're going with those colors here. Because Ron is very traditional when it comes to his critters. And I have dismayed him on many occasions by actually looking at what things look like in real life instead of looking at what they look like in D&D. And he's all like, what is this? So there was one time, and Julie sculpted this set. There's a bear, a wolverine, and I think some kind of hawk in this set. It's probably comes in a different configuration in bones, but this was originally released in metal. And I was very excited to paint it because I like painting like critters and familiars and stuff like that. But, a black bear is kind of boring to look at. Like, if you have a black animal, you know how hard it is to take nice photographs of it, because, you'll just see a black blob. We had a black dog, and all of our photographs of him are a big black blob. So I'm like, I know, there's variation in bears, and I've seen these ones that are kind of like this cinnamon brown color. I'll paint the black bear as a cinnamon brown bear. And this, really happens in real life. I easily found photos of cinnamon brown bears. Even though this was like before, Google image and stuff really was much of a thing. Back in the olden days when I would have to print out my reference photos instead of using a nice screen. I like having a screen so much better. Anyway, so I paint the bear, and I take the pictures, and Ron is kind of like, why? Why is the black bear brown? Why is the black... And I'm like, Ron, that happens. Sometimes they're brown. He's like, but it's a black bear. So I had to paint another bear. I think Reaper actually has both of them. So they have the brown bear and the black bear. Well, they have the black bear that looks brown and the actual black bear that looks black. So because of what the stuff I was saying about how they're supposed to be dark and creepy and whatnot, I don't want to go too crazy highlighting. So I'm going to leave it there for now. Well, do I want to go just a little bit lighter? I'll mix in just a little bit of that light gray that I was using on the sword. But I'm going to be more judicious about where I put it. So instead of rubbing, I'm going to try just touching the brush. Just to pick out a few hairs on like areas where things are facing up or curving or whatnot. Because one thing about adding more contrast, which has definitely been a theme of all the episodes where we were talking about how do you adjust your minis, the extra, the higher levels of highlights and the darker levels of shadows, they go on a pretty small area, and that's part of what makes it work. Like on this sword, the only part that's really white is just this little bit right there. And that makes it seem brighter than if I had painted the white down to here. Kuniko says the night mode on cameras and phones is great for taking photos of black furred pets. I will have to try that if we ever end up with another black furred pet. We do not have a dog currently. So I think I'm just going to leave the fur there for now and move on to the skin, which really I'm using the same colors. I think I just need a little more Rogue Shadow. So it's still going to be like Rogue Shadow. So I'm going to use that for the shading. The skin was based in this color, and I might have to touch up a few spots. I'm going to look. And I've got the Brine Wind, and then I will go lighter, so I'll mix in the Skull and Crossbones. But first I am going to check for, I'm pretty sure, I'm not going to go totally nuts looking for places that, you know, I maybe didn't get 100% opaque of a coat. Because like right there, I mean, okay, I said that. No, I did use the Rogue Shadow. That's interesting. So I guess I have to use black for the shadow. No, does that look right? That's right, because I said I was going to paint this from dark to light, which is not normally how I paint, but it is faster. I am a very forgetful person. All right, so I'm just looking for places that are really like white or something, or shadow areas that don't have enough. And then I'll start working my way up. So I do have a mix of in between the Rogue Shadow and the Ashen Brown. I had mixed that for the fur, but the same mix is going to work for the skin. Because if I go straight from the Rogue Shadow to Ashen Brown, that is going to be too big of a jump. And even though I'm sure this guy doesn't have, you know, silky, smooth, oilable lace skin, because, you know, he's a gnoll and a pirate, and just a busy guy. He doesn't have time for a complex skin care regimen. Skin at this scale is at least somewhat smooth looking. So I don't want to make the transitions too dramatic. And, well, also from a thematic point of view, this is just really short fur. This isn't his skin. This is just places where the fur is shorter. Although it has been my experience, I do not know if this is true of hyenas, that like if your cat or dog ever gets shaved for an operation, it's usually like the skin is the same color as the fur that would grow above it. So if you have an animal that's got like a mixture of colors on their coat, it always seems to me like the skin, for cats at least, is similar colors. So it'll look kind of have this funny harlequin look sometimes when they get shaved. So I noticed in the pictures of the hyenas that I had that the inside of their ears is quite dark. So I'm leaving the inside black, and I'm just going to paint the like lighter color fur around the edges. So I do like to check reference photos when I can. On other animals, you might find that the inside of the ear is actually a little pink, and it'll be like a similar color to their nose or something like that. So I've gone over some of these areas previously. Sometimes adding more contrast can be a question of more coats of paint, not necessarily lighter paint. Like sometimes you need to kind of build up the opacity depending on, you know, how opaque the paint is and how dramatic your transitions are. So what have you guys been up to? So some of you, most of you must have had your swag boxes arrive if you decided to buy any, or you've had your Kickstarter 5 packages arrive. So what kinds of things have you been painting? What were you most excited about? Let's see. Carrie Michael Crosby says, it is true on hyenas, skin will match fur, spots stay the same from when they are born to when they grow up. Oh, that's interesting. And Kuroniko says, tigers have striped skin. That is wild. Carrie Michael Crosby is the queen of hyena facts and says their milk is the most nutritious in the animal world. Wow. That is pretty cool. And Greymaster says he really likes the Gazetteer. I think you mean the Landlubber's Guide to the Savage Coast. It is. There's some very cool adventure hooks and places, and it's designed so it's part of Reaper's world, but that you also should be able to kind of pull it out and put it into another campaign world as sort of a new world type area. I mean, from a Eurocentric point of view. Greymaster also liked the notebook. Yeah, it's got that handy little sleeve on it. And if you haven't tried the pen yet, try the pen, because those are actually my favorite ballpoint pens. I don't know where Reaper gets them, but I don't even buy ballpoint pens anymore. I just use my Reaper ones. Although, as we discussed last week, I am weird about not using pens enough. I still go with pencils. I like that ability to erase. And if you're like, well, you get nervous about paint because you feel like you don't have that ability to erase. In paint, it's just you paint over it. Like if I decided that, oh, that jump was way too light, I could just paint back over it with the previous layer. I don't have to, freak out about it. Acrylic paint covers over itself really well. So don't psych yourself up getting nervous about trying stuff with paint, because it's like how I was messing on the belt. I don't care. I'm going to cover it up. Just get in there and do it. Don't psych yourself. And I'm giving you the advice that I wish I had taken myself in my earlier days of painting. I was a very persnickety, stressed out painter, and I think that doing that held me back more than it helped. Kuroniko says the Swagbox hasn't arrived in the UK yet. I built the giant spider from Bones 5s, and one of the cats is very concerned by it. I do not blame your cat, because I think it was Bones 3 also had a giant spider, and we had like a little countdown party for that one too. And for some reason, Ron runs up to me and asks me to hold the spider while he takes a picture to post on Facebook or whatever. This was before streaming was a very viable thing. And I'm like, yeah, okay, sure, Ron. I love holding giant spiders. It's my very favorite. I've painted one spider, and it was definitely not a good paint job, because at a certain point I was kind of like, okay, let's just get enough paint on you to call it done and move on with my life. That was for a board game called Mice and Mystics. I don't know if any of you have seen that one. It has, it's a different art style than Mouselings, but it's like a similar concept. It's intelligent mice with equipment and stuff. And then the opponents are rats and cockroaches and a giant centipede and a spider. The centipede actually, I thought I was going to be fine painting the centipede. And then I looked up some reference, and I got some fun facts, and I was kind of like, you know what? Now I'm really grossed out by centipedes too. Now, I need to paint a little bit on the muzzle. There's going to be like a nose there that I have to figure out at some point. But my plan was to have the muzzle be fairly dark and then put some lighter brown fur kind of between the muzzle and the ears as a way of trying to draw more attention to the face. Because another theme of what we've been talking about the past few weeks in improving miniatures and stuff is the idea of trying to have a focus point. Like, I want to make as much attention here as I can. So that's one reason I chose to make the really bright shiny look on the sword there, because hopefully it'll help keep the eye going between those two locations. So I'm gonna go into a little bit of this lighter brown color, and I'm moving into smaller areas for the highlights. Is it just like places where the fur is a little shinier, or if it was a person, or like a skin type situation where maybe there's a little sweat or oil that the light's catching. I'm trying to keep those pretty small. Oh, I did totally forget the ears. Hello, Droggy Dynamite. Interesting name. Greymaster says, I have a seafaring dungeon in a box set up to module 9, so all of it is great, really. Oh, well, that's good. I'm glad that book's going to be useful for you. And Carrie Michael Crosby loves Mice and Mystics, and so does Kieraniko. As is the airborne version, Tail Feathers. Oh, I don't think I've seen that one. I haven't painted it yet, but I got the expansion characters for Mice and Mystics. But yeah, board games are our other hobby, and that is the only one that I have painted. I painted figures that didn't come in the game, so I didn't like the figures that came in another game. And then eventually we didn't like the game. So I got some different characters to paint to represent them. They were very small and they weren't well made. And now I'm like blanking on the game. It was like in space, but you were just a crew. It wasn't like a big battle game or anything. But I ended up, so I'm not too sad that I painted them things for a game that we didn't play, because I took them to Gen Con the year after I painted them and entered in Unit, which is not a category I get to enter very often in contests. And I think I got 3rd place, so that was kind of nice. I got to do something I don't normally do. All right, and then I still keep forgetting the ears, because I do want those ears to have some light on the edges, as furthering that idea of drawing attention up to the face. So if we have that nice contrast between the dark inside of the ears and then the lighter cup of the ears, and he's like in good pirate fashion. He's got earrings on both sides. And I'm going to get to do like, nice bright gold, non-metallic metal on those. And that will also help. Let's see if this helps the camera. Let's see. So people are talking about some of the space role-playing games that they've played in the past. And I'm debating whether I want to go just a little brighter on the skin, like in super small, the short fur, just in small areas. It'll help make a nice contrast with the darker fur as well. All right. Now I'm pretty sure that I'm going to want to put color in the shadows of his skin. And I'll just bring back the actual paints that I've been using. But I don't know what colors yet. So if I was the kind of person who had a plan, and this was one of those miniatures, I might have thought out some things and be mixing that color in right now. I'm not worried about it because I can do stuff and then come back in and add stuff in the shadows later. If you were watching when I was working on these guys, I added like green in the shadows of his skin and the shadows of the red thing, and I added purple in almost all the shadows on this guy. So I tend to, I'll often kind of play it straight with colors while I'm painting the main, the initial pass of painting, and then as I decide other colors, depending on what color blue I use in the shadow of these pants, I'll probably take some of that dark color blue and add it to the shadow of the short fur areas. But also maybe I'll like whatever I do on the sash, which is kind of an open-ended question at this point. I haven't decided that yet. And do that instead. So let's just see where I am on the sword. I think I need to add, this is a long area with not much happening, so I think I need to go just a little darker up here. I want to kind of keep this a dark, not like super dark, but like not a bright, shiny paladin type of metal. So that's my goal with the sword, but I also want to make it interesting to look at. But now I'll work on the opposite face a little, or the connecting plane, and try to create the shiniest mid-merit. Now this is where I end up having to be careful, because that face is done and that face is done, so now I can't goof around with my I don't care if I get paint places philosophy. I need to try to be more precise. We talked about the non-metallic metal a little more last stream, so if you want kind of more of the theory part, I would recommend watching that one. I mean, I didn't go crazy on the theory. I went into the theory of how putting dark next to light is effective. I did not go into the here's how to physics. So this is one of those areas where I was talking about sometimes you have to build up coats. It didn't look very light colored until I came in with another coat. I see people are discussing playing cool space themed games in the chat. So no one else is working on either Bones 5 or Swagbox, guys? I almost feel better. So I keep looking at like the forums or at the Facebook page and stuff, and people are like, and I've already painted these, they painted the ship and some of the other huge things, and I'm like, well, maybe I'll unpack my box one day. I've been very impressed with people's gung-ho enthusiasm for getting in there and getting it done. So this is pure white now. I may have to come back with another little dab of that as well. Greymoser says he's been doing things I don't like. That's interesting. So you're trying to get through the figures you don't love before you start painting the good ones. Well, but don't let yourself get put off. Like if you start not wanting to paint, then like paint one you're into and then go back to the guys you don't love. Kerniko says, I'm still trying to catalog my Bones 5. So many minis. Yeah, I actually never catalog anything that big. It's like if I'm missing something, well, that's nice. Carrie Michael Cosby is putting the glow-in-the-dark ship together. It's because she wants it out and glowing in the living room. I would love to see that, because I bet that's pretty cool. V. Manaqua? Sorry, I'm sure I'm butchering your name. I'm trying to get the trees and twig blight guys set up for my campaign at the end of this week. Oh, that should be interesting. Dog father is working on Reapercon entries, started late due to life and lack of motivation, so hustling to see what I can get done. You are well in the tradition of contest painters everywhere. The dog father is not ideal, but this is definitely how a lot of contest entries get made. So do not despair. Oh, there's some kind of... Okay, I think the sword comes out here, and I need to address that a little with the paint a bit more. So I was trying to go straight down to the hilt, and there's a little bit that comes out. And then on this side, it's going to have to be a brighter color. These are my knot details. Darker here. And this is kind of funny because I normally would not paint the sword when we're talking about painting, the order of painting things. I normally would have painted the sword last. Partly that's a holdover from painting metal miniatures, but especially if you don't have this kind of holder where, you know, I can do this and not touch the sword. If I were touching the head of the miniature, I could be rubbing paint off the sword. On a normal human person, I often don't, a humanoid type person, I paint the hair towards the end as well for the same reason. But in this case, I wanted to start with the fur because of the dry brushing, and then I ended up starting the sword because I was trying to find an area that wasn't connected to any of the parts that had wet paint last week when we were just kind of getting the initial coats on. So now I'm pretty close to done on this sword. There's something that looks a little weird where this part joins that part. So I'm going to have to paint one of those lines that I don't like to have to do because it requires a lot of precision. But I think that fixes it. And then I had demonstrated how I painted a light line with the side of the brush here, and as I suspected, a lot of that got wiped out by the subsequent painting, so I'll just add that back in. So that's because I keep the brush perpendicular, and this is a sharper edge. The edge pulls the paint off the brush. I'm just gonna go to straight white for this little curved part where the light would be glinting off, and then I painted a little bit on this interior plane, but I don't think I didn't address the bottom part at all. So I just want to get a bit more paint on that, and then I have to decide what to paint next. And now we've also run out of things that I had pre-decided colors on. I suspect the pants are going to be the next logical thing to paint because they are underneath a lot of other things. Yeah, I want to be dark up there. I guess I need to paint the hook as well, but you guys may be tired of... Oh, am I still frozen? So it was doing that weird thing again, huh? Huh. Could you still hear me like last week, or you couldn't even hear anything? Grey Mouser said he's also working on the 3 from the Layer Up box set. I hope you're enjoying that one. I've painted Ingrid a few times now. I like, even though she's a small character, her face is nice and large, so it's nice to practice faces on. And I also found that I could manipulate the expression of her face a little bit. So I have a class that I do at conventions. It's kind of like more advanced face painting, including trying to do expressions, and that is one of those areas where you are somewhat limited by the sculpt. Like if someone's got a closed mouth neutral expression face, you can't really turn them into like they look like they're screaming in fear or giving a war cry or something like that. That's, you can't do that with paint. I mean, you can't do it, but you can't do it with paint alone. You'd have to do a head swap or some sculpting or something. But I was able to paint Ingrid to, I've got like a kind of a neutral version, which was one I just painted ages ago for fun. And then there was one where she looked kind of cranky and one where she's kind of smiling. So I'm not going to go up to pure white on the bottom part because that is not really a place people should be focusing a lot of attention. I want it to compete with the other areas of the sword. So there's that bubble I was mentioning before, and it's because it's just slightly, maybe if I turn it like that. So I don't know if this happens to you guys. This happens to me like all the time, where I'll rinse my brush and I won't get that bubble off when I, rub it on the paper towel or the sponge or whatever. And so this can cause two problems. One, it can, gravity can push it down and it'll get on the miniature while I'm trying to paint. And then I just I get another brush and just wipe stuff off and let that area dry before I come back to it. Or I'll come over to the palette and it will drip into the pool of paint and change the consistency and highly annoy me. But even after, 15, 18 years, I don't know, this is still happening to me. So I guess it just is what it is. Well, I don't know what I was talking about during the part where it froze completely. And I don't know why this thing is happening where the cameras freeze, but my voice doesn't. I will have to see if Justin can consult on that at some point. Greymaster said, being somewhat experienced, I wanted to learn more and found it very useful so far and able to apply it to other models. Well, that's great. That's great to hear. That's what I was hoping for with the kits, is that it would kind of, it's not so much about those models as giving you a foundation for painting what you want to paint. And that technique from that kit is what I've been using on the short fur. I've just been, instead of starting with the middle color and adding shadows and then adding highlights, I've just been, I went straight up from the darkest color. The sword is a little bit different. I've been laying a foundation of color with wet blending and then touching it up with like little stipple strokes. And I'm about ready to be happy with that. I guess I could paint the hook. Unless that's boring because you've already seen enough non-metallic metal for now. But let's see. Let's see where we are time-wise, because I got so distracted last time that, yeah, I think we only have 10 minutes left. Is that correct, Wendy? So I probably should, I'll just work on this hook, because if I don't finish it, it won't be that disappointing. I think I want to do the hilt probably, like I'll probably do like the hilt and the buckles and the rings in like brass or bronze or gold or some kind of yellowy metal to add a little bit of contrast and visual interest. I suspect that, a real sword would be the same metal throughout, and also he's not like a super fancy pirate, but we can say that he robbed someone who was more fancy. So you have the problem with the little drop tube, Kuroniko? Makes me crazy. Even though like I have the sponge and everything, I still get problems with that happening. So now I do have to think a little bit about physics, which is unfortunate because that was never my big strong suit in life. And I'm just going to treat that as a cylinder. So the reflection will kind of be in a strip in the middle of the cylinder. And then I have to think about this part. So I'm not going to worry too much about science. I'm just going to make stuff up. I want to draw attention to the hookiness, I think, more than the pointiness. So I'm going to put the bright part right there. And I'll do like a little supplemental bright part right there. You notice I haven't even looked at the other sides yet, because that's really part of non-metallic metal, is accepting that it doesn't shift in the hand the way real metallics do. So if you get this guy, as I move him around, I mean, I painted shadows in and I painted highlights in, but because it's metallic flake, the light is also going to still affect it. And real metal objects, where the highlight is influenced both by the position of the light and the position of the viewer. So that's why, if you prefer metallics, which if you mainly play with your figures, you probably do prefer metallics. That's probably why, because the reflection on the miniature is acting more the way you're used to metal acting in the real world. With non-metallic metal, you kind of are saying, okay, people are likely to look at him from this angle, and they're likely to look at him from this angle, and they're likely to look at him from this angle, and if it looks like crap from this side, I'm just going to live with it. Greymaster said, I don't specifically know about Twitch, but video takes up more bandwidth, so it's probably not really anything more than that. Yeah, I do a hardwire connection for the show, so I plug in instead of relying on wireless, because Justin said that would probably help. And my husband, like when we first started, I was worried we would have trouble because my husband was having a business meeting at the same time, and I think he had to have his video on. But he had finished that before the problem started, so I don't know. Perhaps he was doing something else on the web. He is a programmer, so if he needs to do stuff on the web for his job, in this work from home world, which actually I like having him home. I didn't think I would. Like when quarantine first started, I was kind of like, oh golly, I like my alone time. During the day, I just sit and paint or do whatever it is I do. How is this going to work? But I was pleasantly surprised that it was fun. I like having him here. And not just to open jars or whatever. Which again, I need, not because I am a weak woman, although I am a weak woman, but because I'm a weak woman with hand and wrist problems. And now toe problems, so whatever it is also on my toes as well. I'm very excited. My grandmother had that kind of arthritis where you get all gnarled up, so I suspect that is what is happening. I'm sure that's not the technical term for that. So that's kind of another plane, and that's going to give me that shiny reflection dealy. And I'm even going to try to go just a straight black. A little line. Technically on this side, it should probably be a little lighter there because the reflection's off the ground. It should probably be a little lighter there. I may or may not actually do that. For some, you know, there may be figures where you want to be super exact, but to me, unless it's like a very fancy contest entry or I have some reason where I'm being very correct, I would rather be concerned with the keep it cool principle. So it's more important that it look cool than it 100% reflects physics. I also would like to, I've been finding it hard to study non-metallic metal. Like, even though I've been doing like 2D art and stuff, there's not really a, here's how the physics of metal works if you want to depict it in art, article or video or whatever that I found. I found a couple of decent videos on YouTube for miniature painters. I do not currently recall the name of the person who made those videos, but certainly you can look for that if you want more of a technical explanation. I occasionally do a non-metallic metal class at like ReaperCon or whatever, but that is not my topic this year. This year I wanted to pick something that you kind of need to experience live to get it, because it uses a particular tool and substance and stuff that I will be supplying to the class. I'm not expecting people to bring that themselves. Since it's been a while since we've all been live, I thought, well, why don't I make my classes the most, this needs to be in live, in-person thing that I can do, since I now have this avenue and the blog and stuff to talk about things on stream. I mean, I'm not saying like I could demonstrate this on a video, but for you to actually try it out yourself requires equipment. Oops, I missed that we were freezing again, apparently. I'm not sick and I don't have COVID or anything. I just have a throat problem. And I think we must be entering a new season of allergens that is aggravating it again. I'm one of the few people, a lot of times people go to Texas for ReaperCon and they complain about the allergens, and there are actually fewer allergens in Texas than where I live. I live in a top 10 allergy city, which is not really what you want to be in the top 10. Oh, there you go. So I often do better in Texas than I do at home. Other than I find the hotel air to be very drying and stuff. So I apologize for the coughing. So we are just about at the end. So would you, hold on again. Oh, where do I live that's top 10 allergy city? Knoxville, Tennessee. Lovely mountains and trees, and we're in a valley, so all the allergens congregate. So I think I probably will continue with this guy next week. Hopefully you guys would like that. Hi, Miniatures Den and 104 friends. Wow. Unfortunately, we are just finishing up. So, but I've been painting on this knoll, and I think I will continue painting on him next week. I'm sorry about that, guys. Because, you know, we're all leading up to, well, not all of us, but a lot of us are leading up to ReaperCon, and I think it's nice to just kind of have, hi, Burl, Miniatures Den, Gallow Fire. It's nice to have a couple of streams where, you know, we just sort of hang out and talk instead of me trying to overload you with information and or hyena facts. So thanks for coming. Unfortunately, we're about to sign off, and since my throat is going, I'm not going to go through the shows. I'm going to let Quindy find us a raid. There should be a calendar on the Reaper Miniatures Twitch channel where you can find out all of the other great shows that you can enjoy here. So thank you all for coming. If you think of any more ReaperCon questions or traveling with things or anything like that, feel free to let me know before the show in case there's anything I need to demonstrate. But also just come back and ask me next week. So I'll see y'all then. I'm just going to take off the sound. Okay, I'm pretty sure that Quindy will get us a raid in just a minute. And hopefully whoever you go visit will sound much better than I do. So thanks for coming. It always amazes me that people do. And have a great week. I still don't have one of those screens. I need to get one of those screens so that Quindy has them in it. Wine Zone. Here we go. We're going to be rating Jarrett's Terrain Minis. Have a great week, everyone. The Null Waves by too.